Most people think the Zapatista movement was just a 1990s rebellion, a group of masked indigenous fighters demanding land rights in Mexico. But here's the truth. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were building a global blueprint for resistance, decades ahead of their time. The Zapatistas weren't your typical guerrilla movement. They mastered media strategy before social media even existed, organized decentralized leadership before it became trendy, and crafted a vision of justice and equality that inspired activists worldwide. From Occupy Wall Street to the rise of online movements like Anonymous, their influence is everywhere. So, why isn't this common knowledge? Why does history paint them as just a local uprising rather than global pioneers? And what can today's movements learn from their quiet yet revolutionary success? Let's break down the untold legacy of the Zapatistas and how they shaped the world of activism as we know it. When people think about the Zapatista movement, the first thing that comes to mind is the dramatic uprising on January 1st, 1994. The image of masked rebels storming towns in Chiapas, declaring war on the Mexican government and demanding justice for indigenous communities has dominated their narrative ever since. It's easy to see why this misconception exists. The media at the time focused on the guns, the masks, and the spectacle of rebellion. Headlines framed the Zapatistas as a militant group stuck in an isolated corner of Mexico, fighting for land rights and little else. To outsiders, they seemed like just another regional uprising that would fizzle out as quickly as it began. And here's the kicker. The Zapatistas didn't entirely push back against this perception. Why? Because the spectacle worked. The dramatic nature of their rebellion drew global attention to the injustices they were fighting against: poverty, displacement, and the erasure of indigenous cultures. But here's the truth. This surface-level narrative misses the point entirely. The Zapatistas weren't just reacting to local issues, they were laying the groundwork for a much larger vision. Their movement wasn't just about Chiapas. It was about creating a new way of organizing resistance, one that transcended borders and inspired people everywhere to challenge oppressive systems. The misconception persists because it's easier to box the Zapatistas into a story of localized rebellion. A small uprising is less threatening than a global movement that questions the very foundations of capitalism, power, and inequality. But once you look beyond the masks and the initial uprising, it becomes clear that the Zapatistas were never just a flash in the pan. Their strategies, ideas, and principles have influenced activists worldwide, even if their role in shaping modern movements isn't widely recognized. Let's dive deeper into this hidden legacy in the next section. Here's the truth. The Zapatista movement didn't just fight for indigenous rights in Mexico. They redefined how modern activism is organized and executed globally. Far from being an isolated rebellion, they created a revolutionary model that movements around the world are still using today. Let's start with decentralized leadership. While most movements at the time relied on charismatic figureheads, the Zapatistas operated as a collective. Subcomandante Marcos, their most visible leader, repeatedly stated that he was a spokesperson, not a ruler. Decisions were made collectively, ensuring that the communities themselves, not a single figure, remained at the center of the movement. This approach later became a hallmark of movements like Occupy Wall Street, which adopted similar leaderless structures to empower grassroots participation. Next, consider their mastery of media and storytelling. In the 1990s, the Zapatistas harnessed the power of the internet, a tool still in its infancy, to spread their message far beyond Chiapas. Subcomandante Marcos's communiques, filled with poetry, philosophy, and sharp critiques of neoliberalism, humanized the movement and resonated with people across the globe. This was activism as a narrative, and it worked. Fast forward to today, and you'll see activists using social media platforms like Twitter and TikTok to amplify their causes in the exact same way. Finally, the Zapatistas' emphasis on global solidarity set them apart. They didn't position their struggle as just a local issue. They framed it as part of a larger fight against systemic oppression worldwide. This resonated deeply with the anti-globalization protests of the early 2000s, like the Battle of Seattle, and continues to influence movements like Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, which unite people across borders to tackle global issues. The evidence is everywhere. Their decentralized approach, innovative use of media, and focus on global interconnectedness have shaped how modern resistance movements are organized. When you start to see activism through this lens, it's impossible to ignore the Zapatistas' influence. But how did this indigenous group from Chiapas create such a groundbreaking movement? Let's explore their strategy and vision in the next section. Here's the part most people miss. The Zapatistas didn't just redefine activism. They created a movement so deeply rooted in their communities that its strength came from being misunderstood. Their genius lies in how they operated in the shadows, allowing outsiders to focus on the surface, while their real work happened where it mattered most, within their own people. For instance, the Zapatistas' focus on autonomy and self-governance rarely gets the attention it deserves. After the initial uprising in 1994, they didn't cling to their moment in the spotlight. Instead, they retreated into their communities and began building a system of independent governance. They established caracoles and councils to manage their own education, healthcare, and justice systems, an alternative to the corrupt institutions of the Mexican government. This wasn't flashy or headline-grabbing, but it was revolutionary. The Zapatistas weren't interested in proving themselves to the outside world. They were interested in creating a model that worked for their people. This quiet grassroots approach is one of the reasons their movement has endured for nearly 3 decades. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The Zapatistas were fine with being seen as just an uprising. Why? Because that perception shielded their long-term goals. If the world thought of them as a regional rebellion that had fizzled out, it meant less scrutiny of their ongoing work. While governments and corporations ignored them, they were busy building a self-sustaining movement that couldn't be crushed by outside forces. This deliberate choice to let people misunderstand them is part of their brilliance. They understood that the real revolution wasn't about public perception. It was about creating lasting change on their own terms. So when we talk about the Zapatistas' legacy, it's not just about their influence on global activism, it's about their ability to quietly transform their own society while letting the rest of the world underestimate them. Let's dive deeper into the evidence of their long-term success and global influence in the next section. If you want proof of the Zapatistas' enduring impact, look no further than their autonomous communities. Since their initial uprising, they've operated outside the traditional systems of government, creating an independent society built on equality, sustainability, and self-determination. The caracoles, their administrative hubs, are the heart of this autonomy. Each caracol oversees a network of villages, ensuring that decisions are made collectively and resources are distributed fairly. These hubs provide education, healthcare, and even justice systems, services that the Mexican government has often failed to deliver. Their approach to education is particularly groundbreaking. Zapatista schools teach indigenous history, language, and values, ensuring that younger generations grow up understanding their culture and identity. This isn't just resistance, it's cultural preservation. And here's the thing, this model works. While many grassroots movements struggle to maintain momentum, the Zapatistas have thrived for nearly 30 years because they've focused on building systems that empower their people. This quiet success proves that their movement wasn't just a moment, it was a blueprint for sustainable change. The Zapatistas didn't just transform their own communities, they also inspired movements around the world. Their principles of decentralization, grassroots organizing, and anti-globalization have become staples of modern activism. Consider the anti-globalization protests of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Activists at events like the WTO protests in Seattle drew directly from the Zapatistas' playbook, framing their resistance as a fight against the exploitation of people and the planet by neoliberal economic systems. Zapatista slogans like "Another world is possible" became rallying cries for a global movement, and it didn't stop there. Movements like Occupy Wall Street adopted the Zapatistas' decentralized structure, ensuring that no single leader could be targeted or co-opted. The same is true for Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, which emphasize collective action and community-based solutions rather than top-down leadership. Even in the digital age, the Zapatistas' influence is clear. Their early use of the internet to spread their message foreshadowed how today's activists use social media to amplify their causes. From viral hashtags to live-streamed protests, the strategies the Zapatistas pioneered in the 1990s have become the norm. But it hasn't all been smooth sailing. The Zapatistas' decision to operate outside traditional systems has come at a cost. By rejecting government aid, they've had to rely entirely on their own resources, which has been a challenge in impoverished communities. They've also faced continuous threats from outside forces. Paramilitary groups, often linked to the government, have targeted Zapatista communities, trying to intimidate them and dismantle their autonomy. Despite these challenges, the Zapatistas have remained resilient, a testament to the strength of their vision. On a global scale, their influence has sometimes been overshadowed by larger, flashier movements. While their ideas have been adopted by many, the Zapatistas themselves often go uncredited. This raises an important question. How do we ensure that their contributions to modern activism aren't forgotten or erased? Their challenges highlight a deeper truth about activism. The fight for justice is never easy, and sustaining a movement requires constant adaptation. But if the Zapatistas have proven one thing, it's that meaningful change is possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Zapatista movement wasn't just an uprising, it was a blueprint. Their decentralized leadership, focus on autonomy, and mastery of storytelling reshaped how we think about activism. From Chiapas to Occupy Wall Street to the digital activism we see today, their influence is undeniable. What makes their legacy even more remarkable is their commitment to staying true to their values. They didn't fight for headlines or recognition, they fought for their people and a vision of justice that transcends borders. And here's the big takeaway. The Zapatistas proved that meaningful change doesn't require massive resources or traditional power structures. It starts with community, creativity, and the courage to imagine a different world. So what can we learn from their story? That grassroots movements, even ones underestimated or misunderstood, can create ripples that shape the world. The Zapatistas' fight is far from over, and their legacy is still unfolding. If you found this deep dive fascinating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's continue to uncover the hidden stories that inspire change and challenge how we see the world.